right, so Jack, you have some question for us that has come from our community today.
Absolutely. Lots of great questions that are very informative, and they are really interested in what they want to know. So the first series of questions are related to the United Methodist Church as a whole and the current situation that is happening with the current split that's occurring. So we have two questions about that. The first question is, will there be a vote on the UMC/GMC split no matter what? And then, or only if it is requested, does every church have to vote?
Okay, those are phenomenal questions. So, if you're not following every single United Methodist blog or news article that's out there, and I understand many of you may not be, though some of you may be, there is some division in our denomination right now. So can you remember long ago, before the COVID-19 pandemic shut the world down, we were supposed to have what's called a general conference, a global gathering of Methodists to make decisions and changes in our denomination in 2020. That has not happened. Leading up to that conference was essentially a negotiated separation within our church regarding particularly interpretation of Scripture and shared ministries with folks who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, LGBTQIA. Those are words you'll hear me say through that, but that's what those letters mean. And there is a lot of, I would say, diversity about how we interpret Scripture in the United Methodist Church around a lot of things, including how we interpret the Scriptures that speak specifically to LGBTQIA matters. So there was a sort of negotiated separation that we never got to vote on. And that has been delayed now until 2024 at the earliest. And we are optimistic that that will happen. But we have to hurry up and wait for that. And who here is really good with patience? I know I'm not. So in the midst of that reality over the last couple of years, as we've been in the pandemic and as ministries have still happened and people are still facing the future, there was a desire from a group who's now known as the Global Methodist Church to go ahead and begin formation and invite churches that are interested to leave the United Methodist Church, particularly over maintaining current restrictions in the Book of Discipline that bar the performance of same-gender weddings, and the ordination and full service and ministry to folks who identify as LGBTQIA+. The reality is that when the current United States and the United Methodist Church, there are many United Methodists in the United States who are open to more inclusion. Not saying it's mandated inclusion, not saying every church has to practice the same way, but allowing for more inclusion if a congregation, an annual conference, or an individual who identifies as LGBTQ or individuals who wish to get married who are same gender in our churches desire to get married. There's more openness to that in many United States United Methodist churches. So on May 1st, there was an announcement for the formation of the Global Methodist Church, and some churches are beginning in that process. Now, because he's standing up, oh no, what is he going to say? I just like to move when I speak. Because there has not been a general conference, every annual conference and every bishop is handling this transition differently. Doesn't that sound fun? And so we have Methodist churches in Dallas that have a different bishop than United Methodist churches. For us, we're right at the county line at Tarrant County. They have a different bishop. And it is a different conversation just 2 minutes down the highway. You know, and so doesn't that create confusion among us? Yes? And frustration and anxiety. I feel that. And I've heard your questions about this too. Hey, my sibling's church down the road is having a totally different conversation, or their bishop is having a totally different conversation than our conference, our bishop, or our church. I'm with you in the middle of that, friends. I'm with you in the middle of that. So I can only speak to the United Methodist Church in North Texas Conference. And my understanding is your pastor at Plymouth Park. So I want to speak to those things. And no, as I always say, my door is open. I've met with some folks already with your concerns and questions regarding the state of the UMC, and I'm glad to keep talking with you. And more than anything, I hope we're talking to each other and listening to each other. Remember when we started talking, we said we belong to each other, yes? There's this phrase I really love. I hope you've heard me say it before. Being listened to is so close to being loved, most of the time we can't tell the difference. And I hope I listen to you well and you feel loved by me, but more than that, I really hope we're listening to each other well and loving each other well in that, because, friends, I'm not the church. I know it may feel that way. The pastor said we're doing this, but friends, you can look at the wall out in the hallway there. We have pastors going back to 1956. I wasn't born until 1987. I know. I can't control what year I was born. I'm sorry. I have to talk to other people about that. This church has been here long before me, and friends, it's going to be here long after me. The hallmarks of this church are the relationships in this room. The other thing I want to be really clear about with those relationships is I don't want anybody to feel like we're talking about them and not with them. Because there are faithful, lifelong members of our church who identify as LGBTQIA, folks who have blessed our lives in ministries, and to really listen and honor one another well, and that means to not talk about people like they're not in the room. Do you hear where I am in that? I would want to offer you the same respect in that way, to honor your story, honor your journey, and honor every piece of the road you've been on in your life. And I owe that to every person who's been in our church's story. Frankly, when I was introduced to the SPRC back in, can you believe it, March 18th of 2019. I remember that well because it was the day before my birthday. It was my daughter's 4th birthday. I'm probably going to tell a DS in the future if I ever have to have one of those conversations. Let's not do it on a birthday, thanks. But it was a question for our church leadership. Where are you in terms of inclusion? And my kind of pat remark has been this way for years. I'm in loving disagreement with the current statements of the denomination that say homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching, and we have a couple of accountability things around that prohibit same-gender weddings by our pastors and prohibit self-avowed practicing homosexuals is the language from being fully ordained. I'm in loving disagreement with that for a lot of reasons. But as I've also said many, many times, I don't need you to be in agreement with me about that. I genuinely mean that. I do not need you to agree with me. In fact, I think if I told you, hey, here's how it is with Scripture, I bet many of you would laugh in my face. Say, man, I've been a Christian longer than you've been alive, or I've been at this church as long as you've been alive. I've been reading the Bible for decades. Friends, I'm not here to tell you that how you read the Bible is wrong. I'm not here to tell you that your faith journey is wrong. I hope you believe that. Now with that, first, my wife and I are going on a vacation in September because we were supposed to have a 10-year anniversary trip in May of 2020. Guess what? That didn't happen. But we're going in September of this year, finally, for our 10-year anniversary trip 12 years later. Happy anniversary. But when we're back from that trip, I have a 3-week course that I've written and led with many people over what does the Bible say? How do we read that as United Methodists? I'm not saying you got to read the Bible as a United Methodist, but friends, understand I'm professionally accountable to read the Bible as a United Methodist, all right? I'm not practicing religion. I've gone pro. So I mean that tongue in cheek. But for 3 weeks, this curriculum says, yeah, what does the Bible say? Let's look at it from a lot of angles. There are 5 or 6 verses that are really the particular verses that we talk about when we talk about inclusion in the church with LGBTQ folks. Then we talk about what does the Book of Discipline say? And how did we get here? And then the 3rd week is saying, what's the state of the UMC today? And what does that mean for you and me? I would love for you to be part of that conversation, because that's part of how our church navigates these waters, is to be in conversation together. So I hope you'll think about that. We're going to look, essentially, it'll be like mid to late September that we'll offer that 3-week study together. So that's here at Plymouth Park. In North Texas, the current realities, if your congregation wants to move to a different denomination, particularly to the GMC, which is, again, wanting to maintain these restrictions and not have more openness toward inclusion, is a 2/3 vote of the church body that has to want to do that. And that's a discernment process that really in the next couple weeks, if a number of you say, hey, we really need to do this discernment work, I'm glad to call my DS and my bishop and say, Plymouth Park wants to do this discernment work. And they will say, okay, welcome to the next 12 months of your life, where we'll have meetings, we will have groups that meet to discuss, and we'll have visitors from the conference to come and talk with us. So it's a year-long journey for us if you decide you want to discern leaving. 2/3 of the church has got to want to do that at the end of that. And then there is 2 years of apportionment payments and any unfunded pension liability. So right now our apportionment payments are around just shy of $70,000 a year. So multiply that by 2. And then our unfunded pension liability is a whole equation that I do not have all of that of, but I could guess somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000, plus a 2/3 vote. There are some churches who've said, we don't have the money to do that right now, or we don't have the votes to do that right now, so we're going to stay put. There are 10 congregations out of about 300 in North Texas that are currently pursuing that. Across the country, there are about a few hundred who are deciding to leave, but the total percentage of that is about 1.5% of United Methodist congregations in America that are considering leaving to be part of the new denomination as of today. Now, as we move toward 2024, the terms may change. The General Conference may decide a different path to discern or navigate if you want to do something different. That's 2 years from now. So that's where things stand today. That's where things stand in our conference. In our conference, there's no vote that's mandated. I know in some other annual conferences I've seen emails going around, they're asking every church vote to stay or to leave or to be open to something else. In North Texas, that is not what is being asked of us. If your church has a majority of people, and really needs to be about 2/3 of the church body, really wanting to consider that move, then begin that discernment work. I only know the stories that you tell me, friends. And I only know the journey we've been on. I have not experienced as your pastor that there are 2/3 of Plymouth Park UMC that want to consider that kind of discernment process for the ministries of our church. I'm glad to follow up with any of you about that. And honestly, friends, again, I'll reiterate, talking to each other is the biggest thing, because the future of our church is not going to be decided by the General Conference. It's not going to be decided by Bishop Mike McKee or our new bishop that we're getting in January. It isn't going to be decided by me. You know who the future of our church is going to be determined by, yes? Look around. The future of the church is decided by every one of us, each of you who's going to faithfully be here and make the way forward. So did that speak to those elements there? I know we spent a significant amount of time on that, but did that speak to those elements?
There's one other question, just so everyone's heard. I'm just going to read the question, and you can respond to it if you think it. So the other question about the UMC GMC says, in 1972 at the United Methodist General Conference, the first open debate was held concerning homosexuality, which resulted in a revision to the Book of Discipline. The statement that was added says the church does not condone the practice of homosexuality and considers this practice incompatible with Christian teaching. At the next General Conference that has now been rescheduled to 2024, will it address the various proposals to alter existing church policies and to divide or restructure the denomination as a result of differences on this issue?
Yeah, the short answer to that is yes. It will address those things. The long answer to that is that statement made it into the 1972 discipline in a whole long process, and come to my class in September if you want to talk about how that statement ended up there. We've had our main theologians of the denomination have also studied that sentence because it's in the context of paragraphs about equal rights for all people. And the scholars of the United Methodist Church tradition, again, I'm not saying you got to agree with them. I'm not saying you got to agree with that, but the majority report has been submitted again and again at general conferences since 1970. Was that two? So since 1976, saying we don't adhere to interpreting the Bible this way. But by slim margins of like 51% or so, we have approved to maintain that language. So know that there's some context to those things. And so that we have held since 1968, the formation of our denomination, the reality that we have a diversity of experiences and interpretations of Scripture there. So, yeah.